Hello and welcome to the Edinburgh Science Festival. Nearly 60 years after the first woman was launched into orbit, we're on the cusp of a new space age. Join our panel for a special discussion bringing together women working in the space industry from across the world to share their career experiences and hopes for the future. This event is free for you to enjoy thanks to our festival sponsors and supporters. Edinburgh Science is an educational charity. Please consider making a donation through our website to support the work we do.
So welcome to the 2021 Edinburgh Science Festival, and welcome to the panel on women's space. A quick dive into two areas, space, but through the lens of women. I'm so pleased to meet and talk with today's panel. Two of the panelists I have here in the studio with me. We are all socially and responsibly distanced, and we have one panelist that's beaming in from Ottawa, Canada. So represented on this panel today, we have expertise and interest in everything from robotics to quantum physics to astromedicine to education and to security. You will soon see that this panel is a reflection of there is no one path to space. We all have one thing in common, and that is we are committed to helping the Scottish Echo Space System. I'm Yvette Hopkins. I'm the Executive Vice President for the Shetland Space Center, and I'm really glad and happy to be here with you here today. So ladies, if you could spend a couple of minutes just introducing yourself to the audience, that would be fantastic. So I'll start with you, Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm a doctor in an A&E in Scotland, and I grew up in a town just in East Lothian outside Edinburgh. So I became interested in space medicine as a specialty when I was at university, and I went and did a medical elective in Brazil, and I did a research project about CPR in space. So ever since then, I've just been hooked. I think it's a fascinating specialty, and I hope to specialise in both emergency and space medicine and continue to do research in the field.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I'm very jealous that you got to spend some time in Brazil. So Cassandra, tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Well, I was born and raised in LA, even went to uni there for astronautical engineering. Straight out of uni, I went to NASA's JPL where I worked on Mars rovers. After about 7 years, I went over to try my hand at the startup life, went to go work on a new type of transportation called the hyperloop. And now I've decided to move over to Scotland, and I've been living here for quite a few years now and building small satellites at a new company called Craft Prospect.
That's amazing. So Vinita, and you in Canada, tell us a little something about yourself.
Absolutely. Hi. So my background is in operations for human spaceflight and robotics. I'm from Surbiton in Surrey in the UK, and now I'm based in Ottawa in Canada at the moment. So my background is I worked at the European Space Agency as a contractor on operations of future human spaceflight projects, including European Robotic Arm, which is a new robotic arm that's going to launch this year to the space station, which is really exciting. I'm also the founder of a platform called ROKS, which aims to inspire the next generation of young women to choose a career in STEM. And I'm also presently a project manager at Mission Control in Ottawa, working on lunar exploration projects. And it's a pleasure to speak to all of you today.
So I don't know when any of you lovely ladies have time to sleep. You guys are all absolutely amazing. So let's just dive into a couple of things here. And so this is a panel about women in space, which will beg the question, why do we need a special panel for women in space? Some folks might even say out there, where's a special panel for men in space? So each one of you, why do we need a special panel on women in space? And I'll just go back the other way around. Vinita?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's really important to make sure that we have role models in the space industry as well. I think especially to show the younger generation. And I love a quote by Sally Ride, the first American woman in space. And she said, "You can't be what you can't see." And I think we really need role models out there, tangible and visible, to inspire the next generation. And I think it's sometimes hard for young women, especially, to imagine themselves in a particular role in the future when they don't see themselves doing that job today. So I think by seeing someone that looks like you in that role, it really affirms to you that it's achievable as well, and kind of shows them that a role in the space industry is definitely possible for you and made for you, and it's really for everyone as well. So I think it's a really great way to really showcase those role models and make sure they're visible to the next generation. And I think especially if you look at statistics today in the UK, only around 12% of all engineers are female as well. And so it's a really good way that we need to enable to change that and make sure that these role models are tangible and visible, to change that and make sure more young women are able to join the sector in the future.
So visible role models and visible leadership, that's fantastic. So Cassandra, why do we need this panel here today?
Yeah, I would very much agree with Vinita. I think even more than just about inspiring the next generation, showing that it's possible, it's also for all the women who are currently in it. It's basically saying, we belong. You are welcome here. I think that's a message that often you don't receive as much. I know throughout my career and even through uni, I was in a very competitive major. It was mainly male-dominated, as most STEM majors are. And I had several people come up to me and ask me how I got in. It was the question of, do you belong here? Right. And the importance of this panel is, yes, women belong here, just like everybody else.
Okay. Christina, what are your thoughts?
So
give us a personal story.
Exactly the same. I think we're all probably in male-dominated kind of specialties. I'm in emergency medicine at the moment, and kind of classically it was a male-dominated specialty, and it's getting better. But in terms of the space medicine field as well, I've been to America a couple of times to present research to kind of big space medicine like NASA, European Space Agency and stuff. And when you're standing up about to do a presentation to a massive audience, it is mostly made up of kind of white middle-aged men. There's a few women interspersed, but there's not that many. I went out a few years ago and I was the only female on the European Space Agency panel and things like that. And I'm not really sure the reason why, because we are just as good. And I don't know why it's so male-dominated, and only 11.5% of astronauts so far since the 60s have been female. And there's kind of no good reason for that. So I think about visibility, totally. And I like to do talks to kind of teenage girls, medical students who are women, about how you can get into it and why you should, and how females are needed in the specialty and things as well. So I think visibility is really important. And also there's just no good reason why it shouldn't be of equal,
And we need diversity amongst, all of our problem solving. I mean, it's been proven over and over again that it's critically important and makes the best teams. So just a couple of quick statistics, and that's, just recently there was the first UK space sector demographic study that was done. And so in the UK, our space sector is primarily white, male, elderly in age, and socioeconomically privileged. And women are underrepresented, with only a third being represented in the sector. And then a third of the third are only British women. Not that that is anything bad, but there's extreme underrepresentation, not only in the industry, but particularly in STEM. And you guys have all pointed that out here. So how do we support women in the space sector? And Cassandra, I'll start with you. How do we support each other?
I think one of the most important things is to bring light to items. Anything that's on your mind, talk to another woman in there. I think so often we're socialized to believe that if we're experiencing a difficulty, that, well, maybe it's just you. Maybe you took it the wrong way. And one of the great things about talking to another woman and asking them, like, does this sound right, is it helps break that social conditioning, and it gives you both strength, both the person who goes and asks and the person who gets asked, because you get to empower each other, and it only improves things for everybody.
Do any of my other fellow panelists have anything that you'd like to add to that in terms of how we support each other in the space sector?
I think, just to echo those brilliant comments, I think it's really important to talk to other women. And I think also to know that you belong in the space sector. And a great way to do that is to find allies and peers and mentors in the space sector. And I think everybody that I've met in the space sector is, I think in the industry, I think we're really fairly unique in that it's mainly altruistic, in that we all want the space industry to succeed, and we want to enable exploration. And I think it's a really unique industry in the way that it's very supportive of everybody, and also it's also international in its outset as well. So I think the way that I think that's really helped me in the space industry as well, is to really find those mentors, both women and men, I think, in the space industry that can support you along the way. I think men are also essential as allies as well. And I think one of my greatest mentors that really helped me get to my first job and succeed in the space industry was definitely somebody that had been there for a while. And I think by talking to other people, I think it's really important to know that you belong. And I was really inspired as well by Katherine Johnson as well. And I think so women have been a crucial part of humanity's race to space. And I think initially, even in the 1960s and 70s, women weren't welcome, or didn't feel welcome in the room. And now that we're actually hearing the stories of these historic moments as well. But I think people like Katherine Johnson weren't initially made to feel welcome in the room, but they know that they belong there. They know that they belong there because they really believed in their expertise, but also they had an amazing group of women around them that supported them and encouraged them along the way. So I think it's really important to channel people like Katherine Johnson and remember their stories and kind of know that you belong in the room to get the work done and that you're needed in the space industry.
And Katherine Johnson she was always famous, but made a little bit more famous by the movie Hidden Figures. And then I think recently, NASA also named a few buildings after her, but you guys would probably best know that best. But yeah, Christina, anything from you?
Just kind of to echo what Cassandra and Vinita have said. So I found the space sector is supportive. Medicine is quite a competitive specialty. You're competing for jobs, etc. And I guess you are in the space sector as well. But I feel like women do support each other because we all have one kind of common goal, one common aim, and that's kind of advancing, well, for me, it's advancing space medicine, but it's also advancing women, through the specialty as well. And I love the saying, kind of lift as you climb. And I feel like it's a specialty that does that. And we kind of tell each other about different opportunities, promote each other's work and things like that. And I think another thing women classically suffer from is imposter syndrome. And I think that is rife in the industry as well. And even today, I feel like compared to you guys, why am I sitting here? But then you need to talk each other out of that and kind of support each other and rave about each other. And it's a really nice thing to do.
Yeah, so just so you know, I'm feeling like an imposter sitting next to you. You guys are all really fabulous. And bottom line is, you guys have worked incredibly hard for it. And so I just don't want that to get lost on folks here. So let's really talk, let's do a little deep dive. And I'd appreciate it if you all sort of jump in here. But I want to do a deep dive on exactly what each of one of you are doing right now and how you are specifically helping to advance the space sector, because you guys are doing phenomenal work. And I'm going to start with you, Christina. Tell us about what you're doing today.
So when I got into space medicine, the research topic was about CPR in space, which is, for non-medical folks, it's kind of about restarting the heart when someone's heart stops, which is possible in space. There's lots of reasons why someone could have a cardiac arrest in space. So that was the focus of my research a few years ago. That kind of research is such a huge topic, so it's still ongoing, and we're trying to kind of, we've developed the first guideline for space, the first CPR guideline, which encompasses the full kind of advanced life support system from airway management to drug delivery. And our future work is kind of about what's the next step, because once you do revive someone from a cardiac arrest, they need intensive support. Like on Earth, they would go to an intensive care unit, so we need to develop that capability for space. But another thing I'm working on with the Chief Medical Officer of NASA is a paper, and it's basically a primer for doctors on Earth who are probably going to become involved with the space sector when commercial spaceflight takes off, but they don't necessarily have a space medicine background. So it's basically like a guideline for them about how the body changes in space and how to deal with pretty much all the emergencies that could happen to an astronaut in space. So it's kind of like a guideline for everything. And I think that will be really important for the missions back to the moon and missions to Mars, because it's a whole other ballgame, because you can't just evacuate in a few hours. You would be risking the entire crew and the whole mission if one person were to become seriously unwell. So you've got to have guidelines in place to mitigate all the risks, from an appendicitis to a trauma to cardiac arrest to basically anything. So that's the kind of stuff I'm working on.
So Christina, tell us about, in terms of emergency medicine, tell us the difference between responding to the ISS or responding out in Mars, and tell me what happens to the body in each of those locations. I think that would be fascinating.
Sure. So there's a lot of medical differences, but practical differences as well. So technically, if there was an emergency on board the ISS, they could evacuate back to Earth in a few hours. Mars, depending on how the planets are aligned, it takes 6 to 8 months to get there, and there's also a delay of 8 to 56 minutes with telemedicine. Whereas in the ISS, they've got telemedicine, they can kind of talk to them pretty quickly. So you can evacuate, so that's great. So if there was a serious medical emergency, they could come back. Obviously with Mars, you can't evacuate, and you've got that delay in time as well. So in terms of medical emergencies, that means that if someone had an acute appendicitis or something on board the ISS, they could start them on antibiotics. They have an ultrasound on board, so they could show the images to the doctor on the ground, and they could decide whether or not to evacuate them. On the way to Mars, obviously, if they were 4 months into a journey, they couldn't do that. They would either have to take the appendix out or try their best with antibiotics and see what happened. So we don't have surgical capability in space at the moment, but it's something that will be necessary for the journey to Mars in case there was a surgical emergency. In sci-fi films, they have that big pod, the pod that does all the, you just click a button. I mean, that would be incredible. I don't know if that will happen in our lifetime, but that would be incredible. But you need that. And again, if someone had a cardiac arrest in space, what do you do after? So on the way to Mars, if someone had a serious injury and they needed some time, some intensive care afterwards, they would need that capability because they can't just evacuate them. A good example is something called the Lifeline mission paradigm. So that shifts when we go further away into space. So a good example is if you were on the space station and you had a scratch to your eye, you would try kind of topical eye drops and see if it got better. If it wasn't getting better and you were at risk of losing your eye, they would bring you home safely to see an eye doctor. If you were on the way to Mars and the same thing happened, you would lose your eye because you can't risk the lives of the rest of the crew and risk the entire mission to turn around 4 months on the way to Mars. So everything kind of shifts and other things take priority. So that's why, we need things in place for anything that could go wrong, as simple as an eye infection, because they could potentially lose their eye, if that makes sense. Like everything shifts. In terms of physiology, essentially every part of the body is affected by microgravity. Things happen kind of immediately, things happen over time. So within the first few days, you get fluid shifting from your legs up to your face. And if you look online, you can see pictures of astronauts before they go into space, and then pictures of astronauts when they're in space, and they have really swollen, puffy faces, and they have really skinny wee legs. They get something called space adaptation syndrome, and it's kind of motion sickness they get in space. And interestingly, women suffer from this more when they go into space, but men suffer from it more when they come back. So that's just one of the differences in physiology. Other things, your immune system doesn't work as well in space, so you're more prone to kind of infections and sepsis, which again, if there was a surgical emergency or you had to operate in space, that's a risk as well, because you might not heal as well or heal as quickly. Again, another difference, women have a better immune system in space than men for some reason, don't really know why. Bones become weaker, muscles become weaker because we're not using them as much because we've not got gravity. So astronauts are at risk of fractures and things, and they undergo a process called osteoporosis, which usually happens to elderly people on Earth, but that happens as a much faster process in space. So astronauts have to do about 2.5 hours of exercise a day to kind of make up for that. Otherwise, they will lose bone and muscle at quite a fast rate. Other things, so you've got less fluid circulating your body. So when you come back to Earth, when you stand up, a lot of astronauts just collapse because their blood pressure plummets. It also means in terms of a trauma situation, because there's less circulating fluid, they would need blood products sooner. Like there's just so much. Their vision deteriorates if you've been long-term space flight. So that's a big problem for going to Mars, because we need a way to stop.
The risk of blindness is what I understand. That's right.
The risk of blindness and radiation is probably the biggest issue, because we have some protection on the International Space Station at the moment. But on the way to Mars, I don't know if you guys maybe know something about this, a way to kind of protect us from radiation, because at the moment that's probably the biggest problem, because you've not got the protection of the Earth's atmosphere and you're at risk of having kind of acute solar blasts.
That's right.
Which can cause long-term problems and short-term problems for astronauts and on the surface of Mars as well. So that's a big issue. So there's probably other things I've not mentioned. It basically affects every body system, and male and females are actually interestingly affected differently. And in terms of radiation, actually, women have a career exposure limit which is less than men, because they're at higher risk of certain cancers like breast, ovarian and lung cancer. So they are not allowed to be as exposed to as much radiation as the male astronauts for that reason as well.
But something that nonetheless all needs to be studied so that we can learn and advance
there's a lot. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered medically before it would be safe to send people to Mars, I think, definitely.
So Vinita, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just curious, what causes the immune system response to lower?
It's not entirely known, but there is a less of your kind of natural killer cells, and the cells that are fighting infection, there's a less circulating volume, but I think that it's still being studied because we don't really know why. And you also get a thing called space anemia, so you've got a lower red cell mass of circulating in your red cells and stuff like that as well. So I think it's entirely not known, but it's interesting because it raises more potential medical issues if your immune system isn't as well. But I don't know why women's works better than males. Like, it's really interesting, but don't have the answers.
Vinita, I know that you are working or have worked in your past to address specifically through space suits some of these issues. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so when I graduated I studied maths and physics, astrophysics and engineering. While I was studying at the International Space University, I decided I wanted to work on spacesuit design and spaceport training and operations. So I hunted for a spacesuit project, and so I'm being British, I found one at the European Space Agency, and that was called the Skin Suit Project. And I started working on it during an internship, initially as a trainee, and then eventually as a consultant. And as was mentioned, the skin suit basically improves the spinal health of astronauts, and it's worn on board the space station. So as was just mentioned, in space, astronauts lose around 2 to 3% of their bone mass during the 6-month increments on board, and also they grow about 4 to 6 centimeters taller as well. So that impacts their spinal health, and that can be quite painful for them as well at times. And for example, NASA astronaut Anne McClain, I believe she grew around 5 centimeters in around 3 months on the ISS. So the skin suit was designed to prevent the spinal elongation and to try and mitigate the bone loss as well for the crew. And it does this by providing loading on the astronaut's body, and really essentially recreates the effect of gravity on the skeleton. So it's individually fitted to each astronaut, and it's we take around 150 measurements of the astronaut's body along with their mass and the height to customize the suit. And it's using a special material called a bidirectional elastic weave, which means it has different tension longitudinally, and which allows the astronaut to basically be squeezed from the shoulders all the way down to their feet to try and prevent the spinal elongation and then help with the bone mass. And it's also been tested on board the space station recently, initially by the European Space Agency astronaut Andreas Mogensen a few years ago, and most recently by Thomas Pesquet, who's their French astronaut. So it's been really amazing to have worked on the initial prototypes of the suits a few years ago. It's really one of the first projects that I actually worked on in the space industry, to now the suit actually being worn on board the space station and actually helping the crew as well, which is, I think, really the ultimate reward for a project that you've worked on.
Oh, I think it is too. This is really amazing. Cassandra, tell us, so what are you working on? And remember, I have to say this, when Cassandra talks, I ask her to talk to me. Imagine me as your 5-year-old, because it's really check out big brain on Cassandra. But if you could talk to us about what you're working on and where your interests lie.
Well, I hope I can explain it well, because I think it's one of the hallmarks of knowing your stuff is being able to explain it to people who are not in your field. But I'm working on something called quantum key distribution, and specifically doing that from space. And to go into what it is, you first have to understand why, and that has to do with encryption. So anytime we want to keep anything private, we encrypt that data. So it's basically puts a layer of secrecy on it, so that unless you have a specific key, You can't read it. So it keeps our messages, our financial documents, our health documents all nice and safe, and you can't decode it. But the issue is that most of those methods to make those keys are based on how hard it is to solve complex math problems. And all of the computers right now that we have, it would take, many, more time than there is really on Earth, basically, to be able to brute force crack it. So you're not going to be able to guess it with a supercomputer. So that's great. That means our data's safe. The issue is a new type of computer is coming online, and that's the quantum computer. And they're in development at the moment. They're getting better every year. You're getting more. Instead of like bits, which is what computers use, they use qubits. So it's a special sort of state. And these are basically estimated to really come into their own in about a decade. But the issue is that all that encryption, all those really hard math problems, they solve it like that. So it would be seconds to be able to get those keys, and then our information's out. So looking at that, well, how do we continue to safeguard our data? And so that's where quantum key distribution comes in. It's a way to make that encryption or make new keys, but using quantum principles. And so it's optical, so basically we're sending pulses of light to do it. You can't eavesdrop on it because we'll know. It's basically the quantum physics equivalent of if you had a bag of money and you're taking it to the bank, and then you got a text message that says, oh, the bank's getting robbed. You're going to divert. You're going to either go to a different bank or you're going to come back later when the police have taken care of that situation. But you kept all your money, right? So nothing got released, right? You didn't lose anything. And so that's what quantum keys will be able to do is you won't lose any information because if somebody is trying to steal, you find out, it gets sent to you. You divert, you go to a new one, you come back later. And so that's one of the ways that we're looking at doing post-quantum computer cryptography, encryption, securing our data.
So is that do you think over time, because we're launching more, we've got huge constellations that are going, whether it's in low Earth orbit or in space, as we increase accessibility to space, does that mean obviously more data comes down? So will in the future everything be quantum, computed, if you will?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that are going up because a lot of the same technology that goes into doing quantum key distribution from space also is useful for laser communication. And, so there's a lot of those sorts of satellites. So it's, basically what's really cool about when you're making new technology is it's never just for one specific purpose, is it can have applications so much, and it can just really, the innovation field continues to expand. And so, the issue with quantum key distribution, because it is light, it's a physical thing you have to see, you can send those keys and create those keys in different methods. One is you can just send it over fiber, regular optical fiber. Problem is, you can't send it very far over fiber because it gets too many errors the longer it goes. And you have to have beneath a certain threshold of errors. You can send it air to air, but again, the atmosphere makes errors into it, so you can't do it too far. So if you really want a global distribution network, you have to go to space, and you have to be able to send it from satellites. And there's even some cool things that after we do our demonstration mission that's scheduled for next year, we're looking at doing some satellite-to-satellite communications as well to send those keys between satellites instead of just satellite to ground.
This truly is new space, and it's so exciting. Vinita, tell us, what are you working on in Canada? Tell us all about it.
Absolutely. So I'm based at Mission Control in Canada. We're a space exploration and robotics company. So I'm working on a few different projects there focused on mission operations, onboard autonomy, and AI as well, which is really exciting. So we're developing innovative solutions to solve the world's problems and explore space, mainly during using software solutions from everything from lunar exploration to astronaut support systems as well. So one of the main projects I'm working on is a science-enhancing AI technology payload that's called ASAS Craters. And that was supported by the Canadian Space Agency over here. And it consists of cutting-edge AI algorithms that classify the terrain of the lunar surface. So essentially what it does is it makes lunar rovers smarter scientists as well, and it kind of reduces the operational workload of scientists on the ground as well. So the autonomy system that we've developed characterizes geological features from camera images that are taken by a lunar rover, or it could even potentially be used even maybe during the Artemis missions that are coming up in the next few years on an astronaut spacewalk on the lunar surface as they explore and to detect and then select features of scientific interest to sample as well. And all this technology is actually being integrated into another project that I'm leading at the company called Mission Control Intelligence. And we're carrying out that project in partnership with Axiom Research Labs in India. And we're going to demonstrate AI-powered levels of autonomy on a micro rover ahead of these really exciting upcoming commercial missions to the moon as well. It's basically a suite of technologies, including the one that I described earlier, that's going to be integrated with a rover that's being developed, a lunar rover by Axiom Research Labs. And it's going to enable mission operators to make key decisions in science and also navigation operations faster and with more confidence as well. And what's really exciting about this project as well is that the lunar rover is actually eventually it's going to come to Canada in the next few weeks, and we're going to conduct a series of tests in our headquarters here. And we've actually developed a analog lunar terrain at our headquarters as part of our office and in the lab. So we're actually going to test the rover using with our technology integrated into that with increasing levels of autonomy in a suite of tests this summer as well. So there's lots to look forward to the next few weeks.
So on top of all of that, are you not also running a fabulous website I'd love for you to talk about that.
Sure. So yes, apart from my job at Mission Control, for the last few years, I founded a platform called ROKS. So I founded it in 2012. And one of the reasons behind why I did that is as I was going along my career journey, as I progressed each step, so went from university up until starting an internship and traineeship, and I started it when I was working at the German Aerospace Center at DLR on space station, so ISS operations and payload operations. I noticed that the number of women that progressed with me to choose a career in engineering and then work in the engineering field decreased. And as I mentioned earlier, the statistics in the UK are around only 12% of the engineering workforce is female, according to the Royal Academy of Engineering. And only 9% of all engineering professionals in the UK are from a BAME background, so Black, Asian and minority ethnic, compared to around 12% of the UK population. So my passion and the goal of Rocket Women and the work that we do is really to reverse this trend and empower young women globally to consider a career in STEM and also support them throughout this career journey as well. So really seeing someone that looks like you, I think both shows you and allows you that it's possible to achieve your goal. And it's really important to inspire the next generation, because if we look to the future, we need to have more amazing engineers and we need physicists. And there's a massive skill requirement for engineering in particular over the next few years globally. But I think more importantly, as I've gone along this journey, I think one of the things that we believe in at Rocket Women now is that the lack of gender and racial diversity in STEM industries, including the space sector as well, it's not only an issue of inequality, but it also affects the engineering that we do and the systems that we create as well. So I think it's really important to enable engineering as a profession to reflect more of society as a whole. And that helps to prevent unconscious biases as well from being implemented into the design and applications. So from everything from developing new spacesuits with a lunar surface to the AI that we develop and novel facial recognition algorithms as well, we need to really ensure that the creators and the experiences of these systems represent the range of backgrounds and cultures and the diverse users as well, to prevent these biases from being implemented. And I think especially today, more than ever, we need 100% of the talent out there to solve these really hard problems that we're facing in the world today. So that's one of the reasons why I started Rocket Women a few years ago.
And I'm going to put you on the spot, Christina, about the famous Sally ride.
When they sent the first woman to space in the 60s, and then it was another 20 years before they sent another woman to space, and the first two women in space were Russian, and then I think America were like, oh, well, we need to send someone to space, so it was in 1983 they sent Sally Ride. And they asked her if she was going to take makeup to space, and they asked her if she cried during the flight simulator, but they didn't ask any of the men that. But yeah, I think we touched on it earlier about, you know, it was very male dominated back then, and they didn't know what would, because she was a woman, and about her having her period in space, and they kind of didn't know how to deal with that. So they sent, I think, 100 to 200 tampons for a week.
Yeah.
Which just says it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think things have evolved a lot since then, and there's a gynecologist actually at Edinburgh University who speaks a lot to the BBC and everything, because it's people ask all the time, well, what do women do about periods in space? And I think it's actually space doesn't affect your period. So some people thought it might, but it doesn't. But I think there's no kind of regulation around it. I think it's the female astronaut's choice whether or not she wants to start like a combined contraceptive pill to stop her having a period in space, or whether she wants to. Some women don't want that, so then they have their period in space. But I think the problem with that, the pill that they have to take is, on a journey to Mars, they'd need like over 1,000 pills, and it's about carrying that on board, disposing of the packaging, etc. So they're kind of looking into, I was reading this woman's work, and I think they're looking into a kind of, you know, an implant that would be safe for space. Then another worry is the hormones, and that might affect the osteoporosis, the process that's already happening with the bones, etc. So basically it's up to you, but you don't need 100 to 200 tampons.
But let me ask you guys, who inspired or mentored, or who did you look up in your incredible journeys to get you to where you're at today? And Cassandra, I'll start with you.
So I know they told me to hide my mask, but I'm going to go ahead and bring that out, because reason why I wanted to be a space engineer is because I watched too much Voyager, and I wanted to be Lieutenant Belana Torres. So this is her colors there. So seeing that on TV, I mean, representation is super important in getting people interested, and she is my inspiration to go into engineering.
She was a tough one too, man. She was great. Vinita, what about you? Any persons who inspired you or mentors that helped you?
So I was really inspired by Helen Sharman when I was younger. So she's the first British astronaut. And I remember being in the library with my mum when I was even 5 or 6 years old. And I loved space even then. So I tried to find every book that I could about space. I had them piled up next to me. And I was looking through the stories, and my mum was reading them to me. And among the stories of NASA astronauts and space shuttle missions, there was an image of a woman in a spacesuit, and there was a British flag on the arm of the spacesuit, and the caption next to it said that this is Helen Sharman, and she's the first British astronaut. And I think for me, even at such a young age, she really, I think, became a role model to me and showed me that my dreams are possible. So even from a young age, I knew I wanted to be an astronaut like Helen Sharman. But I was also inspired throughout my career by Sunita Williams as well. I think she's really one of the original inspirations for me to even start Rocket Women. And I've looked up to her since I was young. And I was really fortunate to meet her while I was based at the European Astronaut Centre in Germany. That's probably one of the highlights of my career to date, while she was training there for an upcoming mission. And she was wonderful, and she took time out of her busy mission training schedule to sit down with me and support me. And I was writing my master's thesis on EVA suit design and training and operations for lunar exploration then. So she sat down and talked about her spacewalks and the issues they found with the spacesuits and what they do to mitigate them. She was wonderful. And I think I really wanted that experience, that inspiration that I felt while sitting down with her to be felt by everybody. And so that's kind of one of the reasons behind I started Rocket Women, to share these stories of these incredible women that I was really fortunate to have met, and along with a scholarship program as well, to actually enable more women to join the space sector and have those educational opportunities along the way.
That's great. And Christina?
So there's kind of two kind of mentors I've had in the kind of space industry. So the first one is the lady who I contacted initially at university to do a space medicine project with, and I just found out space medicine was a specialty because I'd never heard of it before. And then I was like, that makes sense, because obviously astronauts need doctors, and I'm like, this is amazing. And I got in touch with a lady called Thais Rossomano, who is a professor of aerospace medicine down in London, but she basically trained as a doctor in Brazil, and then did a master's in aerospace physiology in America, then went on to do a flight surgeon training at Johnson Space Center in America as well. She did apply to be an astronaut, and she was probably the most qualified person there, but they went with a military kind of test pilot, which is what it was like back then. That's kind of the criteria.
Yeah.
So she didn't get in, and then she came to the UK, and she was the first person to ever do a PhD in respiratory space physiology. Since then, so she's published kind of over 200 papers in space medicine. She's done the parabolic flights. She does a lot of outreach and education to kids all over the world. She's really passionate about that. And what she does, which is amazing, is she takes on students. So I was just a student in Scotland and just emailed her out of the blue and just said, I'm really interested in this. How do I get into this? And she invited me out to her lab in Brazil, her microgravity lab, and that's how this all started for me. And she kind of invited me in on this project, and then I published my first paper. I went to America, you know, that she really started it, inspired it all for me. And when she started, it was much more male dominated than it is now. And she was the only woman in the class, you know, where she was competing against all these men for a spot as an astronaut and didn't get it, you know, and things like that. And the other one would have to be, so it's a man, but it's the Chief Medical Officer of NASA, J.D. Polk. He's incredible. So I met him at a conference in 2017 and we just started chatting. And since then, after that conference, he wrote me a letter on NASA paper, which was the coolest thing ever, from like NASA headquarters. And he just wrote this letter just being like, you know, like you've got it, like you've got the stuff, you've got the right stuff to be a flight surgeon, which is a space doctor, you've got the right stuff to be an astronaut. And ever since then, like we talk all the time and we kind of Zoom, and he's like, right, what's the next step in your career? When are you putting your astronaut application in? Like he really pushes me and he makes it seem like there's nothing that could stop me from going into space or being a space doctor, no barriers. You know, that's how he makes me feel. He's amazing and he really helps me and inspires me. So
what I really appreciate about you ladies is that, you know, you're much earlier in your career and you're already giving back. And I think that's really important. So kudos to all three of you for continuing to do that, because there are little girls and little boys taking a look at you right now. So just keep up the great work. So what I'd like to do is just kind of pivot towards the future. And so what I'd ask is, you know, what do you hope for the future of space? What do you hope for the future of women in space? And, you know, I'll just kind of open the floor to see who would like to go first. Don't everybody jump at once.
I'll go first. So I think the obvious answer is kind of a balance, because as I said, there's no good reason why only 11.5% of astronauts are women. And I was looking up how many commanders of the space station there have been since it came about. And in the past 21 years, there's only been 4 times that a female has been a commander, and twice were the same woman. It was Peggy Whitson. Sunita Williams was a commander once, and most recently the 4th woman was just in April last month, but it was for the shortest length of time. It was only 11 days. And why is that? You know, we've got films like Alien, that franchise, and it's a female protagonist and she can command and kill aliens and she's a total badass, but there is no reason why, you know, why is there that imbalance? And it's not just in astronauts, it's in the space medicine sector, it's in engineering, you know, it's all similar kind of statistics. And I think we've just got to promote that as a female-friendly environment and kind of speak to the younger women and kind of encourage them into it and support them. And, you know, it's not, space isn't just for boys, and astronauts, it's not just a boy's job, etc.
Yeah, that's perfect. No, absolutely perfect. Cassandra, so talk to me about the future and what your hopes and dreams are for women in space.
You know, like, I think we'll have reached an equality when a woman in her university classes is the worst student in the room and no one doubts that she should be there.
Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the bigger issues, is that you do have to try harder. The idea of being the token is, it takes a psychological toll if you have to be a representative, not just for you and your own work and your own passions, but for, you know, this greater group, and, you know, you feel like you might let them down if you stumble. And so when that goes away, that is when true equality has been reached. And so I want to see that. I want to see us talking to each other more, sharing, because I think there's a lot of power in sharing and in growing your communities, be able to figure out what experiences are common and how you can start tackling them. And so those are the kind of changes I'd like to see.
Vinita?
Yeah, I think that those are really powerful words. And I think kind of looking at to more of the what's coming up in the space sector, I think the future of space exploration itself is really exciting. And we're seeing a big ramping up of interest in lunar exploration in particular, both in orbit and on the surface from international agencies and governments, but also from the private sector and from commercial entities. And looking at the nature of equality, the recent Artemis astronauts were selected by NASA, and we know that there is a gender balance in that selection, which is, I think, really wonderful to see. So I think there's definitely hope for the future. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the first woman step foot on the surface of the moon in the 2020s as well, which is upcoming. And I know NASA and other space agencies around the world are working really hard with the commercial sector to enable that. And I'm also really excited for the achievements that we're going to see in the space sector as well. I think this interest is kind of driven by science and engineering and technology development, and also preparing future exploration. We're looking at understanding the resources on this that we find locally at the moon and prepare us for what we want to do later. And I know a lot of companies are involved in developing the gateway as well. And I think that's going to be really pivotal in exploring the lunar surface, and also I think really inspirational for young children today to see a new space station being built in lunar orbit. And it's designed by NASA in conjunction with ESA, the European Space Agency, JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency as well, to enable humanity to return to the vicinity of the moon in the 2020s. And it kind of builds on that international cooperation that we've developed over the last few years in the International Space Station. But it's going to be really different from the space station as well. It's going to be around 1,000 times further out in the solar system than the ISS. By being further out as well, it means that we can use it for a staging post in the future for exploration missions to the lunar surface, or even for other deep space destinations as well, including Mars. So it's really a way for us to learn more about deep space astronaut expeditions and science investigations, as well as being a port really as well for deep space transportation and for landers en route to the lunar surface, and kind of learned how to overcome these technological challenges that we face to live and work in deep space.
Yeah, so it's all about problem solving, right? So the last line of what's that movie, the Martian, right? You guys, I think everybody's seen that movie with Matt Damon. But when he's at the very end, he's like, what is this all about? Basically, it's about problem solving. And to be able to problem solve, you've got to have all different views and people and ideas involved in that. So here's my last question for you. It's extremely serious. Very serious. So what I'd like to know from each one of you is, what is your favorite space movie, book, TV show, or song? And you will get an extra bonus point if there's a woman involved in it. Quick, round robin. Cassandra, go.
You already know it. Star Trek Voyager.
Okay.
Captain Janeway, B'Elanna Torres, you can't beat them.
Okay, so that is your favorite TV show. That's it for you?
By far.
All right, you're going to get a beer out of this. You get a bonus point. Okay, what about you? Space movie, book, TV show, or song?
So I like the Alien franchise, but I particularly like Prometheus with Elizabeth Shaw. And I don't know if it's because that's the scene with the medical pod and she goes in and gets surgery done herself to get the alien out. And
That's
it's just
right.
so cool.
That is pretty cool.
It's amazing. And yeah, so that would be my favorite, yeah.
Vinita, what about you?
I think my favorite movie is Contact with Jodie Foster. So I think that was an amazing movie. My favorite TV show is definitely, I think, Stargate SG-1. I think Samantha Carter was, someone that I looked up to, even though it was a fictional character. So I think maybe one of the reasons I even studied astrophysics at university was really knowing that it was a step to the space industry as well. And I think books, I think the Red Mars, Blue Mars, and Green Mars trilogy is probably one of my favorites.
So I've been doing all of the questions today, and so you guys are brilliant within your own fields. Are there any questions that you would like to ask each other?
I think to fully turn it around, I have a question for you.
Oh.
As somebody in some very male-dominated fields in the entirety of your career, is there any particular bits that you would say are important for women to know about in helping to support each other?
Oh, thank you very much for asking me that. So real briefly, Cassandra knows my background. I spent 30 years in the U.S. military, leading soldiers in and out of battle. But I think the most important thing, and so I was back in the way back, is that you have to support each other. And the environments that you will find yourselves in, you will find yourself sometimes as the one, the only. But you've got to find your tribe and work closely with them. Do understand that that people are looking at you, and you've got to be generational in thought. So yep, you're struggling through something right now. You'll have friends around you who will support you with that. Build a cohort of fellow women, but also understand that every decision, everything you do, you are laying the groundwork and the seed work for the women that come behind you. And that's really important. So thank you for asking me that. But anybody else?
I had a question. I think it's maybe more for Vinita, but if you know, Cassandra, feel free to pipe in. It was about the skin suit. Is there any way to have that, but like a suit to protect against radiation? Because I was talking about how that's going to be one of the biggest medical challenges for going to Mars. How do we protect the astronauts from all these kind of acute solar blasts and just background radiation as well? Is there any talk of developing like a suit to protect against radiation? Is that possible? Or
I don't think I've heard of a suit. There's been a torso that's been, I think it's perhaps the German Aerospace Center, the DLR. We're testing a torso you'd wear on top of your normal flight suits on board. And I know that during the first Artemis missions, they are going to test and send, I guess, dummies to actually test and see how much radiation the crew will actually be exposed to. So both male and female represented during that flight. And I think with the skin suit, I don't think you could incorporate radiation protection in the current prototype. I think you'd have to look at the loading, but if it didn't affect the loading of the suit, that would be okay. But I think there's lots of different developments out there. I know it's being looked at least, especially for the Artemis missions where we're going into deep space for the first time in decades.
I love this. This is great. Both of you guys problem solving right here in front of everybody. Cassandra, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I mean, my background is really in robotic exploration, so the types of radiation shielding is mostly for electronics, far different than what we'd have to do for humans.
Flesh.
So it's not, something I know a lot about, except that you do need the shielding that can come from thickness of, your construction. And I mean, I've even heard of basically trying to use water for it, just there's a lot of interesting.
I have heard of that, but then the thought of this big spaceship going to Mars just surrounded by water bottles just sounds, but if that's the answer, that's the answer.
I think for nuclear propulsion, it might be possible as well to have some sort of water-based shielding, so that'd be interesting, and also shorten the journey to Mars, so you have less risk of radiation if it's a quicker journey to get there and back.
Okay, so I'm calling it right here, right now. You fabulous women are problem solving in front of everybody, so you got to come up with a team name. So I don't know if it's Team Edinburgh Science Festival Women in Space, but you guys got to come up with a team name, because really, our hopes are set on all of you guys as we go forward into the future. And I really wish you all the best as you continue in your excellent pursuit of knowledge, and that you share it not only with the world, but also with the little girls and boys that are looking up to you guys. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Edinburgh Science Festival. I hope you found this as enlightening as I did, and just really proud of bringing these issues and shining a spotlight on these fabulous professionals. So thank you until we see each other again.